Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Reforged podcast. My name is Drew and it's a pleasure to be speaking with you today. On today's episode, we're going to be continuing the series that we started last week on three of the major logical arguments for the existence of God. Today, we're going to be looking at the design argument, which essentially focuses on all of the intricate, finely tuned details of the world and universe that we live in, and how those signs point to a creator, that the world is too complex, too intricate, um, too finely tuned for it to possibly be just a coincidence or happening by chance. So, thank you so much for tuning in today's episode, and I hope that you'll enjoy it. Again, if you have any questions, comments, anything that you'd like us to talk about in different future episodes, or if you have any prayer requests, please leave those in the comment section of the YouTube or the Spotify episode. There'll be ways to do that on both. And I'll be happy to take a look and be praying for you. I'll also be happy to invite everyone else that's listening to the show to pray for that as well. But thanks so much for tuning in and showing interest, and I hope that we can be supporting you as a community of believers. Let's get right into today's episode. The first thing that we need to go over is kind of like in the last episode, what exactly is the presupposition, or the supposition rather, that this argument makes to prove the existence of God. And essentially, the argument is the universe and also the living things in the universe, the biological organisms, um, present very strong evidence of being designed. There are a lot of intricacies in creation, a lot of finely tuned details, a lot of things that seem to be very particular and specific, that if they were changed even ever so slightly, it would throw off the balance of everything else. And so, because the universe presents so much evidence for being designed, there must in fact be a designer, which of course would be God. Um, I'm going to be again using a basic framework that was provided from Dr. Natasha Crane off of her website, and I'll link that in the description like I did with the last one. So feel free to check that out and look at some of the links at the bottom of the page, especially for some deeper, more in-depth sources on some of these ideas. It'll definitely be worth your time. But one of the first things that we bring up here is what's called the watchmaker analogy. It's very simple, just to prove um, just to prove the major premise behind this is, say you were walking in the middle of an empty field. All there is just grass. There's nothing else in it, and you come across a silver pocket watch, and you pick it up and you notice all of the precise details about it. You notice that it was fashioned out of existing materials. It's nice silver metal that was obviously hard to get, required a lot of work to procure and then shape and fashion into the chassis of the watch. Um, there seems to be some ornate polish and engravings on it that suggest some kinds of markings of artistic creation. There seem to be um, a small photograph inside the front of the watch of another person. There also, of course, is the fact that the watch is working, that it's ticking, keeping precise time. If you were to open it up, you'd see all the gears and mechanisms inside that allow the watch to function as it does. Um, and of course, this watch is very different from the field that you're in. It's made of different materials. It's clearly created with a lot of precision. It has a functional purpose. Um, you would likely assume that it would have to come from a creator. You know that somebody had made that watch and somebody had left it there. It wasn't just a simple occurrence. You could, of course, also assume that it was just a simply random occurrence or random formation, that a watch materialized right there in the grass, but that is a very unlikely occurrence of chance, as opposed to the easy assumption that if you find something that has all of these signs of design and intricacy, that it was created by someone. And that's basically the same premise that we apply to our universe. Our universe has a lot of the same qualities and signs of creation and design that would suggest, hey, there's someone that made this world. There's something that created it. It wasn't just a simple occurrence of chance. The world just didn't coincidentally come into existence by some random alignment of cosmic forces. No, this was an intentional design. And that's what we're going to get into today. The next page of my notes here. So as I mentioned, the universe has an appearance of design, right? And before we can assume and go into like connecting the appearance of design and arguing really intently that it's not just an appearance of design, but it is design. I just want to go over some general examples of all of the things in our universe that seem to have the appearance of design. There are lots of fine, particular, well-defined scientific processes that we've observed and underlined in our human existence, and we've observed these in our world, and I think they all point to a design and a designer. So the first would be very simply, if we look in biology, DNA is a fantastic example. The human genome is so complex. It contains tons of data, many instructions for the creation of life itself. The human genome outlines all of the important traits of a person, what makes them unique from others. And this, of course, we're looking at people here, but it does the same for all animals and other creatures as well. All creatures have DNA, even down to the smallest cell, still has loads of complex DNA. Um, but for people, right, this defines their unique qualities like hair color, eye color, facial structure, height, weight, generally things like that. Um, and then also, it defines the processes by which we continue to survive. So it's what tells our heart to beat, our lungs to breathe, our minds to think. And um, without DNA, none of the functions and processes in our body that allow us to live and allow us to house the consciousness of our soul would be possible. Um, and there's a famous story that comes from Dr. John Lennox, who is um, a, a European. He's a scientist, and he's a professor in the UK, but he also is a very well-known apologist, and he has a story that he's retold very often, where he's talking at dinner with an atheist, and he asks the atheist to look at the menu for the dinner that they're ordering and observe the words roast chicken. Um, and he asks the atheist, how many letters is that? And the atheist counts it out. It's like, oh, it's just, just a handful of letters, it's just whatever. It's just 12 letters. And he's like, okay. And then he says, do you think those letters just appeared there? He's like, well, no, like the waiter wrote them down or the owner of the restaurant wrote it up, whatever it might be. And he's like, okay. And he's like, and then what scientifically says that those words mean anything? And he couldn't come up with a good answer, but just it was observed that okay, humans understand language, and so that's why those words meant something. He's okay, and so he said, so you don't think it's very likely that those words were put there by chance? They're put there with purpose. Those letters were strung together to make that word that you could understand. He's like, yes. And then he pointed out the fact, well, so how, if it's so unlikely that this is a coincidence, that you can so clearly see that these words were written down with purpose, and how do you explain the human genome being just chance? Because that's billions upon billions times more complicated, more unlikely, therefore. That'd be accurate, functional, and understandable. Don't you think that that was put there with meaning and with purpose? And so, that's a really good point to make. Is there's a lot of things in our life that are similar to observing creation that we don't take for chance. I mean, that's exactly the point of the watchmaker analogy. So how come something that would be even more unlikely to be coincidental, we're so quick to say, oh yeah, the more unlikely thing, that's probably what happened. Perhaps it's more of an internal issue in our hearts than it really is a logical one. But then going off that, also in biology, just noticing that all the creatures on the earth have different physical attributes and capabilities that allow them to survive and thrive in their environments. Um, Of course, there's the evolution argument. I'm not going to get into evolution right now, its legitimacy, but the idea, of course, that creatures are made to have the capabilities that they need. Um, I don't think that that can be coincidental, and even scientists who disagree on why exactly creatures adapt and change and become more suited to their environment, they still agree that that is intentional change that's happening with reason. And then the other thing I want to point out too is how there's a lot of uniqueness in the life on Earth, but also the uniformity. So, of course, every creature, every person, everyone is different, right? Everything is different from each other. There's all unique different qualities. There's never be a person that's exactly the same as another person. However, you can still observe a uniformity and you can still observe a general rule for all the species on Earth about their physical features, about their intelligence, about their functions and capabilities. For example, humans, like, we've all got the same sets of organs. We've all got the same number of arms, hands, fingers, legs, feet, toe, ears, eyes, nose, mouth, etc. We can have differences in like our hair color and the appearance of our different things. We can have people that are more intelligent, people that are stronger, people that are. We can also have people, obviously that have deformities and don't follow those rules. People who are perhaps missing a couple fingers or an arm when they're born, or things like that. And um, in fact, that more so proves that there is this general rule, because we know that there's something that's gone wrong genetically when there is a deformity or something that's outside of the normal for the human species. And so I guess all that to say is that biology presents this very interesting case where we have a lot of unique individual creatures on the earth, but of different species, creatures are very similar and designed very similarly. And so it would suggest that this was an intentional design choice. If we look at physics, right, you've got gravity being a great physical quantity, very important, and it is precisely strong enough and weak enough to sustain our life and also the life of all the creatures on Earth. If gravity were stronger, if we're talking just on our planet, that would affect us on the way we grow and develop. That would restrict our life. If it was weaker, same thing. Um, Notably, with our spines, this is what you see with astronauts that go to space for prolonged periods of time. Like, we can compress and we can extend our spines depending on our gravity, and that can have a lot of consequences health wise. But then, if you want to go from a bigger perspective, right, if gravity was different, then the orbit of the planets would be off, the size and shape and speed of the orbits would be off. Uh, by now, we would have careened into the sun or another planet, um, but we always seem to maintain just the right orbits, just the right distances from our sun. If you also want to look at things like conservation of energy or conservation of matter, right? Those are important because that suggests controlled parameters in design, things that are unchanging rules, unchanging laws. That, if you think back to last episode, right, unchanging was one of the qualities that we could assign to God based off of the creation of the universe. So that would align with that argument too. But you know that there are known finite quantities of resource in the universe that balance each other out, that prevent anything extemporaneous from happening, anything extreme outside of the normal from happening. And then I already mentioned, but space, the size and the position of Earth is just in the right spot, as a lot of scientists have called it, the Goldilocks zone. Um, it's right in the right size, right position, right orbit, right location. Just everything is just right to sustain life, just right, like Goldilocks. And as I said, the sun in the orbit, like us having a sun in our orbit around it, just enough to provide enough heat and energy and light to sustain life, but not to burn us to a crisp. And if anything changed in any of these qualities and parameters, plus a ton more that I haven't thought to mention, um, just minor changes in any of these could be ultimately destructive for our world and cause major consequences. So it's good that we can rely on those things being constant. If we want to get into some specific things, though, the two most common claims um, is DNA, which I've already talked about a little bit, and then also the irreducible complexity within that argument. That if you want to argue that life evolves like Darwin does, and we'll get into that in just a second. We'll wait on that. The second thing would be I've got a list of different fine tuning arguments in addition to the ones that I've already kind of touched on a little bit more broadly. There's a list that I found that just goes over a lot of them. Not super in depth, but just touches on them. So we'll start with the DNA though. If we look at again the Darwinian explanation for complex life on our planet, he points to evolution. He says the complicated life forms in our universe come from more simpler life forms as their ancestors. So simple life becomes over time through evolution, complex life. This is something that they teach in schools now, right? The issue with that is that it does assume that there's an origin of a first living thing from which all life comes from, but it doesn't actually explain where that came from. Now, we know in the Bible that God created all these different forms of life at the beginning of the universe, and the Bible explains that. It may not offer an entirely scientific or explanation. The Bible has a lot of different themes and purposes. There's debate on how much of the Genesis account of creation is literal and how much of it is symbolic. But it does offer at least an explanation to say, hey, there's a God who created all of this life. How he did it isn't of importance, but we can still attribute it to him. Whereas this just assumes like there was a first living thing, and it does not even try to answer the question of why. The way I like to think about it is kind of like this. I'm a big fan of Legos. If you haven't ever noticed in the background of my videos, I've got a lot of Lego Star Wars sets back there, and trust me, I've got a lot more around me too. And a good explanation, right, is to say, okay, Darwin's theory of evolution is saying you've got these Lego sets, right? You know, you've got like a Lego X-Wing, right? And that's a Lego set. That's a complex combination of Legos. And you can break down through evolution theory where this Lego set came from, these smaller Lego elements that came together to make the set. And then when it comes to the question of, okay, so the Lego pieces are what makes Lego sets, what made Lego pieces? It doesn't talk about the guy in the factory in Denmark who printed out all the pieces. It just is like, well, there just are Lego pieces, and you can make Lego sets with them. It's kind of like the kid who plays with the Legos and doesn't. He's not concerned with where the Legos came from. He's like, I got the pieces, and now I can build the set, right? So if we try to look and say, well, then where does this first life come from? Because there's not a satisfactory answer from this evolution theory. Theoretically, the first life, as it is the first life, can't come from organic material. It can't come from life. So it must come from non-life or inorganic matter. And this is a thing that scientists call abiogenesis, which is cool because Genesis is the first book of the Bible, and the first two chapters of Genesis describe how life started. But I digress. But anyway, abiogenesis is the suggestion that there's some point where a first life came from non-life. And if we again look in the book of Genesis, right, God creates the first life out of the dust of the earth. He creates the creatures and animals. He creates people out of the dust of the earth. He creates all things out of the dust of the earth. So that would answer that question. But even if we're not looking at, okay, where does this first life come from? Let's just look at where we are now with complex life. And we look at DNA, right? We look at the DNA alphabet. To go a little bit more in depth than we did earlier, there are four what we call letters of the DNA alphabet. We call them A, C, G, and T. They're just different proteins, different parts that make up the human genome and also, well, other genomes, but I digress. it's what we label it so we can decode and make sense of it. And by decode and make sense of it, I mean try to understand as best we can because we still can't really fully. Um, but anyway, there's a lot of sequences of DNA of these different four letters, and they hold genetic information kind of like code, right? Instructions on how to build life and how to sustain the function of life. And if we look, right, a single cell, right, a single cell of an organism, and there are a lot of single cell organisms on Earth, of course. But if we think of complex life like human beings, for example, we have an honestly incalculable number of cells. It's huge. It's in millions upon millions, billions, trillions, right? All these cells, and each cell contains approximately on average 4,000 groups or libraries of information. And in those library, there are 500 subcategories that we call pages of information, and each of those pages has more information. So essentially, each cell in our body is not just a library, but a collection of libraries. And there is a unfathomable amount of genetic data stored within our human bodies. And going back to the roast chicken argument of earlier, it is kind of absurd to not assume with that much information being written into our very bodies that it wouldn't have an author, that wouldn't have a creator. To think that that's all coincidental, I don't think is very logical at all. We also come to that argument of irreducible complexity, where essentially, if you're saying that this complex system is a combination or an adaptation of the simpler system, you'll eventually get to a point where a system cannot be further simplified, and a simple system cannot be a justifiable explanation for the more complex system. When the parts that are left that build other things are complex, you get to a point where it's inexplicable exactly how it works. Like you could say, well, humans are made of organs, are made of cells, and then you can say the parts of a cell, but then after that, then what, right? Where's like the actual life in that? How come that happens? How come that forms? And so we say that there must be an origin in God, that God must have creatively designed all this because if something in its simplest form is too complex to explain scientifically or logically or with an assumption, then the assumption that you must make is that it came from a more intelligent mind, and that would be the creator, that would be God. I also want to again read a list of those fine-tuning points. So we'll do that. I got a list here. I'll link this in the description of the video. We'll start this category called cosmic constants. And so, as we already talked about, the gravitational force constant is finely tuned. And again, important to consider that if any of these were mildly tweaked, life would not be possible. The gravitational force constant, the electromagnetic force constant, the strong and weak nuclear force constants, the cosmological constant. We got initial conditions. So the initial distribution of mass energy in our universe, the ratio of mass for protons and electrons, the speed or velocity of light, the mass excess of a neutron versus a proton. We also have planetary conditions, steady plate tectonics with the right kind of geological interior on Earth. There's the right amount of water in the crust. There's a large moon with a right rotation period. There's a proper concentration of sulfur on Earth. It has the right planetary mass. It's on the near inner edge of circumstellar habitable zone. So I think that's the Goldilocks zone. There is low eccentricity orbit outside spin orbit and giant planetary resonances. Not sure what that is. There's going to be explanations for all this, though. A few large Jupiter mass planetary neighbors in large circular orbits, so the planets surrounding us help. Outside spiral arm of the galaxy, near co-rotation circle of galaxy, within the galactic habitable zone, and during the cosmic habitable age. And then the polarity of the water molecule is the effect of fine tuning. So anyway, let's look here. So to start with the gravitational force constant, that is the large-scale attractive force that holds people on planets, holds planets, stars, and galaxies together. If it was too weak, planets and stars couldn't form, and if it was too strong, then the stars would burn too quickly. If we look at the electromagnetic force, that is the small-scale attraction and repulsive forces. You learn about that a lot in chemistry and physics. It holds atoms and electrons and nucleuses together. If it were any stronger or weaker, we would not have stable chemical bonds. So none of our matter would essentially hold together. If we look at the strong nuclear force constant, if it were weaker, the universe would have fewer stable chemical elements, most of which are essential to life. And if the weaker nuclear force constant were much stronger or weaker, then the stars that we need for human life and energy would not form either. And then the cosmological constant. This is the force that controls the expansion speed of the universe, and it refers to the balance of the attractive force of gravity with a hypothesized repulsive force of space, observable only at large scale. So it's probably very close to zero. Essentially, to get the right balance, the cosmological constant must be fine-tuned to something like 1 part in 10 to the 120th power. If it was more positive, just slightly, the universe would fly apart, and if it was slightly more negative, the universe would collapse. So essentially, to balance out gravity, there's this other constant that allows for the expansion of space, and if it were any different than whatever it happens to be, we don't even know what it is, but whatever it happens to be, we would not have a universe. Initial conditions. So these are conditions from the beginning of the universe, which we talked about a little bit in the last episode, like low entropy. So a highly ordered initial state in the universe. Also, there was let's see. Essentially, the odds of the low entropy state that the universe began in of a universe occurring just simply by chance alone are in the order of 1 in 10 to the 10th power times the 123rd power. So such a big number that it's represented in 2 exponents. So basically, this number, you can't even comprehend that in the human mind. We don't even know really what it means to be that unlikely for a number to be that big. So really, it's just extremely unlikely. This is just a coincidental formation of the universe because not even the preconditions for the universe were reasonably coincidental. Ratio of mass for protons and electrons. If it was slightly different, the building blocks for life, like DNA, would not form naturally, so it could not happen. If it were larger, speed of light. If the speed of light was larger, stars would be too bright, and if it was smaller, stars wouldn't be bright enough. So, again, perfectly balanced, as all things should be. If it were greater, I keep forgetting to read these titles. Mass excess of neutron or proton. So if that was greater, there'd be too few heavy elements for life. If it was smaller, stars would collapse quickly as neutron stars or black holes. So essentially, if neutrons were any less or more massive than protons were, our universe wouldn't exist. Steady plate tectonics. If the Earth's crust were significantly thicker, plate tectonic recycling would not take place. And plate tectonics also, it notes, allows the carbon cycle on Earth and also generates a protective magnetic field around Earth. So those are, again, important things. The right amount of water in the crust, which, of course, water you need for life, one of the most important resources. We have a large moon with the right planetary rotation. So in the case of Earth, its gravitational pull of its moon stabilizes the angle of its axis at nearly a constant 23.5 degrees. Relatively temperate seasonal changes occur, and the only climate in the solar system that is mild enough to sustain complex living life organisms is on Earth. So essentially, the moon affects our orbit enough that it affects our climate enough that it allows for life, which no other planet does in our solar system. Proper concentration of sulfur, that's needed for important biological processes, so we need that. Wouldn't have life without it. The right mass in the planet. If the Earth was smaller, its magnetic field would be weaker, which would allow solar wind to strip away our atmosphere and turn our planet into something kind of looks like Mars. So yeah, that wouldn't be good. Near inner edge of circumstellar habitable zone. Okay, let's see what this is. That allows a planet to maintain the right amount of liquid water on the surface. If Earth was just 5% closer to the sun, it would be subject to the same fate as Venus, with a runaway greenhouse effect and temperatures rising to nearly 900 degrees Fahrenheit. And if the Earth was about 20% farther from the sun, it would experience runaway glaciations of the kind that left Mars sterile. So essentially, we're in just the right spot to have just the right amount of water that our planet isn't completely destroyed. That doesn't all become vapor. That doesn't all become ice. It's perfect. Low eccentricity orbit, outside spin orbit, and giant planet resonances. Essentially, it allows our planet to maintain a safe orbit over an extremely long period of time, which is why we haven't had any major collisions with anything that have led to the destruction of our Earth or the loss of all human life. A few large Jupiter-mass planetary neighbors, so they essentially draw away, the bigger planets draw away comet bombardment. That's why we're not very often hit by things, and when we are, they're usually pretty safe and pretty manageable. If Earth was not protected by the gravitational pulls of Jupiter and Saturn, it would be much more susceptible to collision with devastating comets that would cause mass extinction. And as it is, the larger planets in our solar system provide significant protection from the most dangerous comets because its gravity is greater than ours and it pulls it towards it, pulls it off course. We're in the outside spiral arm of the galaxy, which means that we are away, so we're safely away from any supernovas of other stars. Of course, if the sun supernovas, which I guess it's supposed to do in millions and millions of years, then we're not safe from that. But other stars really far away, we're safe from the effects of the supernovas. Near co-rotation circle of galaxy in circular orbit around galactic center. So essentially, we're not in the middle of any asteroid belts or anything crazy like that. We're not in the dangerous parts of the galaxy. We have a safe spot in which we do our orbit around the sun. We're also within the galactic habitable zone, allowing our planet to have access to heavy elements that are necessary for life and for the formation of the planet, but also away from the very dense center of the galaxy, which we'd probably get sucked into because of all the mass there. And also, our planet is within the cosmic habitable age, so heavy elements and active stars around exist without a high concentration of dangerous radiation events. So basically, we have the materials we need. We don't have any of the dangerous things that come from those materials. And then the last thing I ended on was the polarity of the water molecule makes fine-tuning evident, which is interesting. Let's see what it says. The polarity of the water molecule makes it uniquely fit for life. If the polarity were greater, or if it were smaller, its heat of diffusion and vaporization would make it unfit for life. This is the result of higher level physical constants and of various features of subatomic particles. So I guess essentially it's saying water, if it had a different polarity, it would melt and it would freeze at different temperatures, and that would not make it suitable for life. So I'm guessing something like we try to drink water and it would turn into ice, or it would turn into vapor within us, and it wouldn't flow through us. So we wouldn't be able to have, blood, which is pretty important for most living organisms. So yeah, that's pretty interesting stuff. Now, as I say with all of these, that was by no means a comprehensive list, and I by no means am a qualified scientist who has any idea of all of the things that I'm talking about, right? Um, but I think it's pretty clear that you can see from all that stuff just that our universe is very, very finely tuned to not just exist and exist safely, but also, very importantly, to harbor life. As human beings, right, regardless of what you believe about God, we have a unique privilege in this universe to actually observe it, to have consciousness, to be aware of, and be able to think and ask questions about the world we live in and why we came to exist in it. Um, I believe that very few people are actually dispassionate about purpose of human life, right? They may disagree on what it is, and they may even try to search for purpose and meaning in their life through things that claim to be devoid of purpose, right? Like nihilism and things like that. But I think that very few humans are detached from the idea of what's my purpose, why are we here? Because it's very evident, right? Just looking at the things we looked at here, for anyone to see and feel in their heart, hey, it's too it's too unlikely. It can't be coincidental that we're all here, that the world works as it does, that I have a life, that I exist, that I had ancestors that had a life that exists, that we've been capable of making so much. I'm sitting in a room surrounded by stuff and furniture in a house in a neighborhood. It's crazy to think how far from just simply the world existing that our life has come. And I have to believe that all the conditions that led us up to this, that allow us to essentially take for granted that, hey, you know what? I can wake up in the morning and the sun's going to rise. I can wake up in the morning and there's going to be gravity. I'm not going to go step off my loft bed ladder and fly into the ceiling. I'm gonna go down and hit the ground, right? Um, we take that for granted. We take the sun for granted. We take for granted. It's like, hey, I know how to breathe, and I know how my heart knows how to beat, and um, you know, I might have health issues, but like I know how to be alive, right? Um, you know how to think just instinctively. You can't even control the fact that you have thoughts. You obviously have influence over what you choose to think about and what thoughts you have, but everyone has thoughts. Everyone has a mind that works, even to just an extent. So it's just there's so many interesting things that you could spend a lot of time going down rabbit holes thinking about. Like, how is this possible? How could this possibly be? And I think that the simplest answer is there's got to be an intelligent God that created it all and makes it all work. Because how else would all of these things just happen? I want to point something out. We talked about a lot of cool individual examples of things that are finely tuned in our universe that point to a design and a designer. But even just think about for a second the fact that we have an entire list. I read off a list just a second ago of 22 different things. And those are just some of the most common finely tuned points, observations, right? 22 whole things that we're claiming are coincidental occurrences that are so finely tuned and specific that if even just minusculely different, our universe and our life would not exist. There's 22 of those things, not to mention all the other ones that we didn't mention today. Can you really think that that's a coincidence? Is it really logical to say that we're living in the midst of the luckiest dice roll of all time, and not just one, but hundreds and thousands of dice rolls with the lowest odds possible that just happened? I don't think so. I think it makes much more sense to see all that, observe all that, and believe, okay, there must have been someone who created this. In the same way that we create so many things as humans, that I don't look at this poster on my wall and say, this just happened, right? This is a poster that somebody made, right? Somebody designed the art, right? And somebody designed the tools and equipment that they designed the art with. Somebody made the printer that printed the poster. Somebody made the materials and the inks that that the poster was printed with. Sorry, um, somebody made the glass that's used in the frame that I put it in. All those things, and then that's not even to mention like there's also the source material. There's people that made the game and designed the characters and art, right? Um, and then you think too, like, well, hey, like all the materials like glass and plastic and printer ink, like we made those out of natural resources we found. And so if we can recognize that we do work with the things that we find and we create things out of it, why can't we recognize that there's got to be someone out there that created the things that we use, right? When I write down notes with a pen, somebody made the pen and paper that I write my notes with. And I think that the universe is just the same, that everything that we have here, everything that we, again, tend to take for granted, that all comes from God. And I think that deep down we all know and have a sense of that feeling too. So thank you for listening to today's episode and considering this second argument, the argument for design. Um, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. I again encourage you to go check out more of the resources that I have linked in the description that'll go and explain things in more depth than I can, and um, in a much more scientific and qualified way than I can. But I appreciate you taking time to listen to this episode, and I hope that it's impacting in significant ways and getting you thinking about, just how evident God is around you. Again, we haven't even talked about our Christian God specifically, but just it's logical that God exists, and that's the first step to getting that Christian God. I think that's something really important to share with your friends and family, coworkers, people in your life that you want to evangelize to that aren't ready to hear the personal and spiritual arguments because they don't have a rational belief that God is even possible. Um, and so I'll definitely be praying for everyone that listens to this show that God would help equip them to evangelize in new and powerful ways, that they can combine these apologetics with the spiritual, with the anecdotal experiences that they've had, because both are equally important in different ways. Um, and we have to know God in our hearts, of course. We have to know and believe and accept God in our hearts. The Bible says that if we don't do that, if we simply know God but don't actually accept Him, don't follow Him, then it's meaningless. Um, but part of knowing God in our hearts is first knowing Him in our head and knowing Him in our mind. And so I pray that He'll continue to encourage you and guide you as you try to practice that more in your life and in your relations with others. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a like. Please follow the show, subscribe, whether on YouTube or Spotify, just to show your support and also to get updated when new episodes come out. Please be sharing this with friends and family, those that you think would benefit from hearing it. You can share the link to the YouTube or the Spotify episode. It'll be in the description. But thank you so much for watching and joining today. I hope that God has been doing a lot of great and very observable work in your life, and that you feel His presence very strongly. And if you're in a season where you don't and it's hard, I encourage you to keep hanging on and know that although it doesn't feel like it, God is with you, and He loves you and values what is good and righteous and holy for you. So have a great rest of your week, and remember, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another.